I showed my daughter-in-law a scrapbook I made for my son. She looked at the photos, tossed it aside, and said, "You had your turn, he's mine now." My son just smiled faintly. I said nothing. That night, she opened the last page and found something taped inside that made her hands tremble when she realized. I looked at the scrapbook sitting on my kitchen table that morning and told myself I was doing something loving. I had spent 3 months putting it together. Every page held a piece of Daniel's life that I had lived alongside him, breathed into existence, stayed awake worrying over. First steps captured on a disposable camera with terrible lighting. A crayon drawing he made when he was 4 that said "Mom" in enormous uneven letters. His high school graduation photo where he stood squinting into the summer sun, already looking like the man he would become. I had pressed dried flowers from his childhood bedroom window between the pages. I had written little notes in my careful handwriting beneath each photo, just a sentence or two, because I always believed that memories need a voice or they fade too quickly. I carried it to their house with both hands, the way you carry something fragile. I thought it was a gift. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that day, and it took me a long time to admit the shape of my own mistakes. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it actually started. "You had your turn," Marissa said. "He's mine now." She didn't even look at me when she said it. She was examining her fingernails, then brushing something invisible off her sleeve, and the scrapbook was sitting on the coffee table where she had set it after barely glancing through the first few pages. She had the posture of someone who had already decided the conversation was over. 34 years old, and she moved through every room like she owned not just the furniture but the air inside it. I had tried in the beginning to find things to admire about that quality. Confidence, I told myself. She's confident, but confidence and cruelty are not the same thing, and she had a talent for using one to disguise the other. I am Alina Vile. I was 62 years old that afternoon. My husband Harold had been gone for 4 years by then, and losing him had done something to me that I still don't fully understand. It had made me grip harder, not at things but at people, at Daniel especially. Harold used to tease me gently about it, saying I catalogued our son's life the way other people collected stamps, obsessively and with tremendous seriousness. He wasn't entirely wrong. I knew my flaw. I had always known it. The need to be acknowledged, to have my love recognized and received, had calcified into something harder and more dangerous over the years, and when Harold died that need had no buffer anymore. I was precise about everything. I remembered dates, small details, the exact words people used in conversations years before. I never raised my voice. I was in many ways the kind of person who is more frightening when they're quiet than when they're angry. I hadn't understood that about myself until Marissa forced me to look at it directly. "I'll just put it away," I said. My voice was even. It always was. "No need," Marissa replied, still not looking at me. "We're making new memories now." Daniel was on the couch. He gave a small smile, not a smile of disagreement, not a smile that said anything useful at all, just a reflexive bending of his face in the direction of peace, the way he had always responded to conflict, by finding the smoothest possible surface and pressing himself flat against it. He was 38 and still doing the same thing he had done at 12, pretending that if he stayed very still, the storm would pass over him without touching anything. I nodded. I gathered the scrapbook from the table. I said I hoped they'd enjoy their evening. I drove home through streets that had begun to feel too wide and too empty, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time with the book in my lap. Harold's chair was still at the table. I had never moved it. I thought about what Marissa had said about her turn, about his, about mine being finished. I thought about the way Daniel had smiled. I turned the scrapbook over in my hands, feeling the textured cover I had chosen, because it reminded me of the wallpaper in the house where Daniel grew up. And something cold and deliberate began to move through me. I want to be clear about what I found, because the finding of it matters more than what I did with it. About 3 months before that afternoon, Daniel had come to visit me alone, which he sometimes still did on Sunday afternoons. We had sat in the backyard with coffee, and I had taken some photographs on my phone, just idle ones of the garden. He had borrowed my phone to look something up, and when I scrolled through my photos later, I found that he had also been looking at his own photos, had sent himself a few images from my phone. That happens. It's a small thing, but one of those images was in my camera roll and hadn't been transferred away. It showed Daniel at what appeared to be a work gathering, laughing, leaning toward a woman with dark hair at a table crowded with plates and glasses. He was close to her, not scandalously close, but closer than you lean toward a person you don't feel easy with. I had looked at the photo for a long time. I had saved it to a separate folder without entirely knowing why. I knew why that night. I typed a note on a card in my careful handwriting. I do not exaggerate when I say my handwriting has always been one of the things I am quietly proud of. Clear, even unhurried. I wrote, "A mother always notices what her son won't say out loud." I printed the photograph on my small home printer. I placed them both inside a sealed envelope. I went back to the scrapbook and opened it to the last page, the page that still had empty space because I had always planned to leave room for the future. I taped the envelope inside the back cover. I sealed the book shut with a thin piece of decorative ribbon, the kind that looks ornamental but is really just an invitation. Something that says, "Open this, see what's inside." Then I drove back to Daniel and Marissa's house the next morning before they were awake, while they were sleeping, and I left the scrapbook on their front step. I did not knock. I drove home and made myself breakfast, and sat with my floor like I was sitting with an old, unpleasant friend. The woman in the photograph was named Lena Cortez. She was 36, a colleague of Daniel's, friendly and completely unaware that her presence at a birthday dinner was about to become the instrument of someone else's unraveling. I knew who she was because Daniel had mentioned her at some point, months before. She had helped him with a project at work. That was the whole of it, as far as I could tell. The closeness in the photograph was probably nothing. Probably. But I had planted a seed in a very particular kind of soil, and I knew exactly how it would grow. The thing about Marissa was that she was territorial. I had watched her operate for 4 years. She kept Daniel close the way someone keeps something they're afraid of losing, with tight grip and constant surveillance disguised as affection. She would never be able to look at that photograph without her mind finding every dark meaning inside it. I knew that. I had counted on it. That was my plan. It wasn't a dramatic plan. It didn't involve lawyers or public confrontations, or any of the more satisfying revenge fantasies I had entertained during that long drive home the first night. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of plan that only works if you know your target precisely, and I had spent 4 years watching Marissa with the careful attention of someone who never stops cataloging. What I had not counted on, because my flaw is not self-awareness but rather the opposite of it, was that my plan would also break something in me. In the days that followed, I began doing other things I am not proud of. I called Daniel more frequently. I suggested lunches and visits and found reasons to be present in their lives, not out of warmth, though I told myself it was warmth, but because I wanted to watch what was happening. I wanted to see the damage. I wanted to stand close enough to the fire to feel it without getting burned. And I talked with Daniel during those visits. I let old stories surface, things from his childhood, moments we had shared before Marissa existed in his life. I told them with the gentleness of someone sharing treasures, but underneath the gentleness was something sharper, a needle pointed in a specific direction. I was trying to pull him back toward a version of himself that had existed before her, and I was doing it with calculated warmth, which is one of the worst kinds of calculation. "You seem like you're in a good mood," Daniel said to me one afternoon during one of those visits. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me arrange the flowers I had brought. "I'm always in a good mood when I'm with you," I said. He looked at me for a second too long. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Of course, why do you ask? You've just been around a lot lately." "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said quickly. He looked at the flowers. "No, I just noticed." I should have heard what he was really saying. I didn't, or I chose not to. Meanwhile, Marissa had read the note. I could tell because she had changed, not dramatically. She was still sharp-tongued, still moved through rooms like she owned them. But there was something underneath it now, a tightness around her eyes, a quality of watching that hadn't been there before. She checked Daniel's phone. I saw her do it once when he set it down to answer the door. Her fingers moved quickly, practiced, the gestures of someone who had learned to be efficient about their paranoia. She was comparing times and dates in her head, I imagined, constructing a version of events that fit the architecture of her fear. "Lena came up in a meeting today," Daniel mentioned at dinner one evening, not knowing he was walking into anything. "She's been promoted." The silence from Marissa was absolute and immediate. "Good for her," Marissa said. The words were flat and measured. Daniel glanced up, then back down at his plate. "Yeah, she's worked hard for it." I watched from across the table. I kept my face pleasant and distant, the way I had learned to keep it when I was feeling something I didn't want seen. "How close are the two of you?" Marissa asked, still flat, still controlled, but underneath it something was vibrating, high and tight, like a wire pulled too taut. "We are colleagues," Daniel said, with the mild bewilderment of someone who genuinely doesn't understand the temperature of the room. "Right," Marissa said. And I said nothing, and I felt something I am ashamed to name, which was satisfaction. The cracks in Marissa began to show in small ways first. She forgot things she usually kept track of. She snapped at Daniel over things that were genuinely minor, then seemed surprised by the force of her own reaction. Her confidence, that armor she wore so seamlessly, started sitting slightly wrong on her, like something that no longer quite fit. I watched it all with the patient attention I had always applied to the things I cared about deeply. I had always told myself that paying close attention to people was a form of love, What I was doing to Marissa was the other thing that attention can become: surveillance, judgment, the careful observation of someone's weaknesses for purposes that have nothing to do with kindness. About 3 weeks after I left the scrapbook on their step, Marissa confronted Daniel. I was not there for it. I heard about it afterward in pieces, the way you reconstruct events from fragments. From what I understand, she came to him late at night after he was already in bed, turned on the light, and stood there with her phone in one hand and the photograph in the other. "Who is she?" she demanded. "What?" Daniel sat up, squinting against the light. "What are you doing?" "The photograph," she said, and her voice was shaking. "In the scrapbook, the woman you're practically leaning on. Who is she? And don't you dare tell me it's nothing." "I don't know what photograph you're talking about." "The one in the envelope," she said, "in the back of the scrapbook your mother left." A pause. "There was an envelope in the scrapbook." "In the back cover, yes, and there was a note with it. Your mother's handwriting. Don't pretend you don't know." He reached for the phone she was holding. She pulled it back. "Answer first," she said. "Who is she?" "I don't know what picture you're talking about, Marissa. I need to see it." She threw the photograph down on the bed between them. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long moment. And then, because Daniel has always been the kind of person who finds the absurd even in the devastating, he laughed. It was the wrong response, as far as Marissa was concerned, but it was an honest one. "That's Lena," he said. "Lena Cortez from work. You've met her. That's from Pete's birthday dinner, the one at the Italian place on 5th. You were there. You left early because you had a headache." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't come from having nothing to say, but from suddenly not knowing what any of your words mean anymore. "I was there," Marissa said slowly. "You were there," he confirmed. "You said the pasta was overcooked." She sat down on the edge of the bed. The certainty she had been living inside for 3 weeks began to shift under her like sand. She had been so sure. She had built such a detailed and damning architecture out of one photograph and a single cryptic line, and now the architecture was falling, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow interior way of a building whose foundation has been quietly removed. "Your mother," she said. "What?" "Your mother put that in there, that photograph, and that note." He set the photograph down. "What did the note say?" She looked at him. A mother always notices what her son won't say out loud. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, that doesn't actually say anything." "It implies everything," Marissa said. He couldn't argue with that because she was right. The next morning was when it came to a head. I was there. I had come over for coffee, which I told myself was a coincidence of timing, though of course it wasn't. I arrived to find Marissa in the kitchen with the photograph on the counter and her hands wrapped around a mug that she was holding too tightly, and Daniel standing near the window with the particular posture of a man who has spent the night not sleeping. "Elena," Marissa said when I walked in. "Good morning," I said. I moved to set my bag down. I could feel the temperature of the room on my skin. "We need to talk about the scrapbook." "Oh," I said. "You put something in it," she said. "An envelope." "You opened it," I said. And then I heard myself say it, and I heard the shape of what I was doing, and it was the first moment of the whole thing that felt genuinely ugly to me. "Who said you could do that?" she demanded. Her voice was rising now, the armor fully off. "Who said you could put something like that in there and just leave it for me to find? What kind of person does that?" "I didn't leave it for you to find," I said. "I left the scrapbook for Daniel. You chose to look at it. You left it on our doorstep, at 6 in the morning, without knocking. I didn't want to disturb you." "Elena," her voice cracked on my name, "you were trying to make me think he was cheating on me." The room was absolutely still. I set my bag down on the chair. I looked at her and I looked at Daniel, who was watching me with an expression I had not seen from him before. Not his peacekeeping smile, not his passive gentleness. Something more awake than that. Something disappointed in a way that reached past the surface. "I never said he was unfaithful," I said. "I only wondered if you trusted him." "That is not an answer," Marissa said. "It's the only honest one I have." "Mom," Daniel's voice was quiet. "Why would you do that?" And this was the moment I could have deflected, could have smoothed over, could have applied my usual careful surface of calm and walked away unscathed. But Daniel's eyes were on me, the eyes of my son who I had photographed and documented and loved with a grip that had started to damage things, and I felt something give way inside me. "Because she told me I had my turn," I said. "She said you were hers now. and I realized, standing there with that book in my arms, that I had never actually let go. I don't know if I know how. Marissa stared at me. Her face had changed. The anger was still there, but something else had moved in beside it. Something that looked almost like recognition, which surprised me because I hadn't expected to reach her. "Do you know what it's like," she said slowly, "to feel like you are competing with a ghost, with a whole history that existed before you that gets held up against you constantly, that you will never be part of? Do you know how exhausting that is?" "Yes," I said, "I think I do." She blinked. "Because that's what you've been doing to me," I said, "and what I've been doing to you." Daniel exhaled. He set his coffee cup down with a small, final sound. "You didn't prove anything," he said. "Either of you, you just broke something." He was right. I knew he was right the moment he said it. I had not proven that Marissa was unworthy of him. I had not reclaimed anything. I had only demonstrated, clearly and in vivid detail, the worst and most frightened version of my love for him, the grip that damages. "I know," I said. He left the room, not angrily, not dramatically, just walked down the hallway with the steady pace of someone who needs to be somewhere else for a while. Marissa and I stood in the kitchen together, two women who had been circling each other for 4 years, doing damage in our separate ways, and now both of us caught in the open. "I shouldn't have said what I said about your turn," she finally offered, not exactly an apology, but the closest she had come to one. "No," I agreed, "and I shouldn't have done what I did." She picked up the photograph from the counter and looked at it for a moment. Then she set it back down. "He really was just leaning in to hear her over the noise," she said. "It wasn't a question. She had always known, I think. The certainty she'd been building for weeks was never really certainty at all. It was a story her fear had told her, and fear is a very convincing narrator." "He was," I said. She nodded slowly. She picked up her mug and looked out the window. "You're going to have to actually let him be mine," she said. "Not in the sense I meant before, but truly. He can be your son and still be my husband. Those don't have to be at war." I stood there with that for a moment. It was the smartest thing Marissa had ever said to me, and it landed somewhere tender and necessary. I had built my whole approach to Daniel on the unspoken premise that there was a limited amount of him and that she was taking more than her share. But love doesn't work on a budget. I had known that once, or I should have. Harold had tried to tell me in his gentle way that holding on too hard was just another word for not trusting the thing you love to stay. That night Marissa packed a bag, not to leave. She called it needing air, needing a night somewhere else to think. She went to her sister's apartment across town, and Daniel sat alone in the living room with the scrapbook open in his lap. I know this because he called me later and described it, not accusingly, but in the quiet tone of someone trying to understand the full shape of something. "I was flipping through it," he said over the phone, "looking at all the pictures. You know, you spent so much time on this." "I did," I said. "It shows," he said, and then after a pause, "There's another envelope in here." I went still. At the back, taped in, my name's on it. I had not put a second envelope in the scrapbook. "Open it," I said. I heard the sound of it being opened, heard his breathing, heard the small silence of someone reading something short. "What does it say?" I asked. He read it to me. "This time, it's your turn to decide who you belong to." Neither of us spoke for a moment. The kitchen felt very quiet around me. Harold's chair was at the table, still unmoved after 4 years. "Did you write that?" Daniel asked. "No," I said. Another silence. "Marissa," he said, not a question. I thought about it. The handwriting would tell the story when he looked more carefully. Or maybe he already knew. Maybe he had recognized it immediately and just needed to hear me say I hadn't written it, needed to know that what he was looking at was his wife reaching back to him from inside the thing that had been causing harm, finding a way to say something true inside the wreckage. "She must have done it before she left," I said. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Are you going to call her?" A long pause, long enough that I almost said his name to make sure the line was still connected. "I think," he said slowly, "that I need to stop waiting for storms to pass and actually go outside in them." It was the most unexpected thing my son had said to me in years. The man on the couch, the one who smiled neutrally at disaster, had said something real and deliberate, something that acknowledged his own part in all of it. His passivity had not been neutral. His habit of waiting for others to manage the temperature of his life had created the conditions in which Marissa and I had been left to tear each other apart with no one to say stop. "Go call her," I said. "I will," he said. "Mom." "Yes. I love you, the scrapbook is beautiful." A pause, "but I need you to trust that you did a good job, that you can stop now." I sat with that after we hung up. The kitchen was quiet and the chair was empty, and outside the window the neighborhood had gone dark with late evening. I sat with what he had said for a long time, turning it over in my mind the way you turn something fragile, making sure you understand its full shape before you try to hold it differently. You did a good job, you can stop now. I had spent so many years believing that love meant constant maintenance, that the moment you stopped tending something it would die or be taken. Harold's death had made that belief louder and more insistent, because death is the ultimate proof, isn't it, that things do end, that people do leave, that the world can remove someone without warning and leave a chair at a table that no one sits in. But Daniel was right. Tending and gripping are not the same thing. I had confused them for years, and the confusion had cost all three of us something real. In the weeks that followed, Marissa came back and they began a kind of careful reconstruction that I genuinely tried to stay out of. I called less. I waited to be invited before visiting. It was uncomfortable for me in a way I had not anticipated, because the discomfort of loosening your grip feels exactly like loss at first. Your hands don't know the difference. You have to teach them. I also did something I had resisted for years. I moved Harold's chair, not out of the kitchen, not away, just to the side where it would still be present without being the first thing I encountered every morning. It was a small thing, but small things, I was beginning to understand, are where real changes actually live. 3 months after the scrapbook incident, as I had come to think of it, Daniel and Marissa invited me to dinner. Not a perfunctory dinner, not a performance of politeness. An actual meal, the kind where they cooked together and Marissa poured wine and told a story about her sister that made all three of us laugh until Daniel knocked his glass over, and we laughed harder at that. I sat at their table and watched them move around each other in the particular synchronized way of two people who have chosen, repeatedly and consciously, to come back to each other, and I felt something different than what I was used to feeling in that house. Not competition, not the ache of being outside something, just warmth, just the ordinary and irreplaceable warmth of people who belong to each other in different ways, all being in the same room. At the end of the night, when I was putting on my coat near the door, Marissa said something to me quietly, while Daniel was washing dishes in the other room. "I want to say something," she said. "All right," I said. I was cruel, what I said, about your turn being over. That was unkind, and I knew it was unkind when I said it. I looked at her. "Why did you say it?" She thought about it. "Because I was afraid of you," she said, "and when I'm afraid I attack." "I know," I said. "I do something different when I'm afraid. I get very quiet and very deliberate, but it amounts to the same thing." She considered that. "I put the note in the book before I left," she said. "I didn't know if it was a good idea." "It was," I said. "It was what he needed to hear from you." She nodded once. We did not hug. We were not at that place yet. But she held the door for me as I left, and in that small gesture of ordinary courtesy was something that felt like a beginning. Not a dramatic beginning, not a cinematic one, just the quiet, unglamorous start of something that might over time become trust. I drove home through streets that felt a little less wide than they used to, a little less empty. I thought about Harold, who would have found the whole affair both entirely predictable and deeply unnecessary. He had always understood that love worked better when you held it gently, and he had said so multiple times, and I had smiled and agreed and gone on gripping anyway. That was my flaw. That was the thing I carried, that need to hold on hard enough to leave marks. I couldn't pretend I had fixed it. Flaws that deep don't vanish because you've recognized them. They just become something you watch yourself for. You build a habit of checking your hands. I went inside and made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the chair to the side, the scrapbook on the shelf where I had put it, retrieved from their house with Daniel's quiet blessing. I pulled it down and opened it to the last page and looked at the 2 envelopes still taped inside, both of them opened and empty now, their contents having done whatever they were going to do in the world. I looked at my own handwriting on the first envelope, that careful and deliberate script, and felt the full weight of what I had done with it, the calculation, the unkindness wrapped in plausible deniability, the way I had told myself I was being clever when I was really being afraid. I removed both envelopes from the page. I looked at the empty space where they had been, at the final pages of a scrapbook I had built with love that had curdled at its edges. And I thought about Daniel saying, "You did a good job, you can stop now," and I thought about Marissa holding the door, and I thought about Harold's chair to the side. Then I picked up a pen and wrote something new in the empty space. Not for anyone to read, just for myself in the way of an accounting. I wrote, "I love my son." I also frightened his wife and manipulated his trust and called it love, and it was not only love. I held on too hard. I know why. I am trying to learn the other way. I wrote it in the same careful handwriting I had always been proud of, and I let it sit there on the page like an honest thing, because honesty is also something you can practice until it becomes a habit, if you're willing to start small and stay with it. I closed the book. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and dark and completely ordinary. Somewhere across town, in an apartment over a restaurant on 5th Street, Daniel and Marissa were either talking or sleeping or doing the quiet things people do when they are rebuilding something together. I didn't know which. That was finally as it should be. Some things you hold, some things you let have their own life separate from yours, knowing which is the whole of it, really. The whole practice and the whole difficulty and the whole point. I finished my tea, I washed the cup, I went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I didn't check if I had left anything behind.